Definitely will. Very disturbing developments there. We'll be speaking to Thabiso, as she has indicated, just to touch base and get the very latest following the announcement that 6 SANDF members have already perished while busy with that particular fire. But we now just want to welcome our audience. A very good afternoon if you've just joined us. We are coming to you live from our studios in Johannesburg. This is the Week in Review, the program where we review some of the biggest stories to come out of the week. And I am your host, Mfundo Mabalane. Now, the High Court in Pretoria has ordered the Minister of Higher Education, Blade Nzimande, to withdraw his notice of intention to place the University of South Africa under administration. Bad news for consumers who need to further tighten their belts as a fuel price increased this week. Over 5 million hens producing eggs have been culled due to the avian flu outbreak raging across the country. Leading the bulletin, the University of South Africa says it welcomes the High Court order that interdicts the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation from placing the university under administration. UNISA has always maintained that the report of the independent assessor that saw this action is fundamentally flawed and its recommendations totally misplaced. For that reason, the university has taken the report on legal review to be set aside. To speak more on this matter, we're joined by Dr. Tshwane Miller, who's a senior research fellow at the Johannesburg Institute of Advanced Studies based at the University of Johannesburg. Doctor, good afternoon and thank you very much for your time. Let's start with the very latest developments on the matter, the interdict. The minister released a statement noting the ruling, but reading through his statement, it suggests that the slow pace at which the court has moved on this matter is compromising the institution because, according to him, the issues raised in that Musia report are egregious and require that those at the helm be removed urgently. What did you make of that statement?
Thanks very much for having me. I think it's clear that the minister is frustrated and is wanting to act quickly. At the same time, I think it's important to put in context the fact that the independent assessor's report followed a previous report by a ministerial task team. So this has actually been going on for some time. And in that context, one might question the extent of the urgency on the part of the minister. But more importantly is the issue that there was, as I understand it, an interim interdict issued. And that means that were the minister to have proceeded, he would have violated that interdict. And that's not something we really want to see from senior government politicians or indeed officials.
Because indeed there is a pending application to review that particular report, because actually he's acting based on the recommendations of that report. So it was still pending. And what the university had sought, particularly the VC, was that everything be halted pending that review application. Then the minister can only act. But if we are to look at the decision or the recommendation to place the institution under administration itself, was that the only option available to the minister based on the Higher Education Act? And how effective is that kind of a tool? Because we saw with Fort Hare, they were under administration back in 2019. Some have been murdered at this point. We've heard the VC there, Professor Mhlungu, he's decried the level of endemic corruption at the institution. So is it an effective tool, honestly speaking?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, the one question is about effectiveness and the other is about appropriateness. I think also for the purpose of for the benefit of your viewers, I think it's important to put this in a broader context, which is to understand the kind of governance and accountability framework that's envisaged by the Constitution. And that respects institutional autonomy. And I mean, this is a broader principle internationally. So this applies across different spheres. Okay, so for example, the national government can interfere in local government, but there are bars that need to be cleared before that happens. Otherwise, you're not respecting the autonomy of local government. Similarly, in the case of universities, and perhaps even more importantly in the case of universities, because they're very different kinds of institutions, it's important to respect institutional autonomy. What we don't want is a situation where the government can easily intervene or interfere in university activities, potentially violate violate academic freedom and so on, just because perhaps certain academics or certain universities are not behaving as politicians would like them to. So there are protections in place to prevent that from happening. Nevertheless, universities are public institutions. They receive a substantial amount of public money, and they need to be held accountable. So the Higher Education Act gives the minister the powers to intervene, subject to certain requirements. I would say that procedurally, I think those requirements have been met. There was the ministerial task team, there was the independent assessor's report and so forth. But as you say, my understanding is actually there are 3 applications that have been made. One by a former registrar that's in favor of putting the university under administration, and then 2 other applications, one by the VC, as I understand it, to take the report on review, and the other by the chairperson of council to interdict the effort to place the university under administration. And so then it's going to come down to more substantive issues. And on the one hand, the minister, and I also heard the former VC of UNISA, Bani Pachana, raising concerns about the delays and the harms caused by such delays. But at the same time, these are accountability mechanisms that are embedded in our constitutional democracy. And so, one can't get around those. One has to go through the appropriate processes.
But then to the recommendation itself to place it under administration, just clarity there. Would you say it is an effective tool? With just the benefit of hindsight, where we've seen with other institutions how it hasn't necessarily yielded positive results?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to make a definitive statement either way. I think we've certainly seen cases in which putting universities under administration has not, even if it may have improved things in the short term, but when they've been removed from administration, other or similar problems have arisen. Universities are also supposed to be, in some sense, self-governing institutions. So this touches on a broader issue, which is, if you have an institution that, I don't want to use the word corruption because people tend to think about sort of theft of money and so forth, but a university that is not of the quality that it should be when it comes to the composition of its academics, the procedures it follows, and these kinds of things, then appointing an administrator and fixing high-level issues around financial management and so forth is not necessarily going to change the long-term trajectory of the institution. So ultimately, whether you've got an institution that's reached the point of potentially being put under administration, or other institutions, and I think there are many other institutions in South Africa that should be a lot better than they are, what it comes down to is the fundamental composition of the institution, who the academics are, what the institutional culture is, and those kinds of things. And that's not something that's going to be changed by an administrator over 2 or 3 years.
But how would you frame the current challenges? And would you characterize UNISA as being in a state of collapse at this point, as some have stated?
Yeah, I mean, I did read the independent assessor's report. I'm not sure that those hyperbolic statements are quite true. There's clearly serious dysfunctionality in parts of the university. A collapse, I think, is probably too strong a word. And I think also one of the problems that we saw when the independent assessor's report was partially leaked was that certain people tried to pin a lot of the responsibility for the problems on the current vice-chancellor. And I mean, at the time, I commented that was inappropriate because, for a start, the previous ministerial task team had assessed the issues in the university and recommended the appointment of an administrator prior to the current vice-chancellor coming in at all.
So the issues preceded the VC. Apologies,
Indeed,
but
which is not to say that she has no responsibility, but I have to say that I found a lot of the media reporting at the time very unconvincing, and I didn't feel like the report, based on my reading of it, really established a strong case against the Vice-Chancellor. So that also raises nuances then about, does one replace the council? Does one replace the Vice-Chancellor? And we would have seen what the minister intended when he made his announcement, and now we don't know really because that was prevented from happening.
Doctor, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That's Dr. Tshwane Miller, who's the Senior Research Fellow at the Johannesburg Institute of Advanced Studies based at the University of Johannesburg. To this story now, the global shortage of diesel, higher oil prices and the added slate levy saw price of fuel increase. Both grades of petrol went up by between R1.08 and R1.14 per litre, while diesel increased by between R1.93 and R1.96 per litre. Labour Federation COSATU says it's bad news for the economy that is already bleeding.
Various reasons contributed to the latest increase. These include an increase in the Brent crude oil price and the weaker currency against the US dollar, among other factors.
The higher oil prices during the period under review which led to higher prices of petroleum products. There is a shortage of diesel in the market globally. The rand weakens against the US dollar and contributed around 22 to 26 cents per litre. A slate levy of around 30.7 cents per litre is implemented on the price structures of petrol and diesel in line with the self-adjusting slate mechanism rules. The LP gas is increasing mainly due to higher prices of propane and butane, as well as higher freight rate during the period under review.
Labour Federation COSATU is concerned that this latest increase will push up inflation once again, further squeezing workers. Since the beginning of the year, the price of 95 unleaded petrol has cumulatively gone up by 4 rands 28 cents inland and 4 rand 21 cents at the coast. Diesel has increased by almost 3 rands 80 cents inland and 3 rands 37 cents at the coast. The combined price of illuminating paraffin since the beginning of the year is 3 rand 66 cents per litre.
It might push inflation to increase again, and this might cause the Reserve Bank to increase the repo rate, causing further hardships for the working class, businesses and the economy. The huge levels of fuel price increase over the past year and a half have created real hardship for the economy, as has the accompanying levels of increase in inflation. Workers are drowning in debt and are struggling to take care of their families. The wages are not keeping pace with the level of price increases. Government needs to act quickly to reduce the 28% of taxes on the current fuel price regime. It needs to put the road accident fund under administration so that not continuously dependent upon these above inflation fuel levy increases that society can no longer afford.
In the face of these increases, government remains silent on its plans, if there are any, on a way forward to deal more effectively with fuel price increases.
Motorists are advised to keep their vehicles in good mechanical condition, tyres inflated to manufacturer specifications to ensure optimal fuel usage. They are further encouraged to minimize trips where possible, using air conditioners sparingly and not overloading the vehicle. Diabo Seito, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, now for more on this, we're joined by Dr. Azar Jabin, who's the Chief Economist at Econometrics. Doctor, good afternoon, and thank you very much for your time. Now, before we get to the feasibility of some of the proposals to ease the financial pressure on consumers, can we start with the reasons cited by the department for this hike, starting with the Russia-Saudi Arabia decision to reduce oil production? Can you unpack this crude oil matter for us?
Yes, certainly. It's simply an issue of supply and demand. Partly as a result of the fact that Russia wants to get back at the West for imposing sanctions on it following its invasion of Ukraine. Russia got together with Saudi Arabia and decided to reduce production of oil in their countries, bearing in mind that you're talking about the two of the three largest oil producers in the world. What this resulted in was a shortage of oil compared with demand, and that contributed towards the price of oil rising from around $75 to $95 a barrel. And that is the main reason why our fuel prices have gone up. Mm-hmm. The other smaller reason has been that the rand has depreciated against the dollar, and so the rand price of imports of crude oil has and refined oil, fuel, petroleum, has increased.
Mm-hmm. But then realistically, if I take you back to the Russia and Saudi Arabia decision to curtail production, realistically speaking, can the economy withstand oil prices closer to the $100 a barrel as opposed to the $70 level that has prevailed most of this year, basically?
Unfortunately, this is a representation of the manner in which two countries, Russia and Saudi Arabia, are trying to benefit themselves, but at the cost of the rest of the world, or many, many other countries in the rest of the world. Russia needs higher oil revenue to fund its military operations in the Ukraine. And Saudi Arabia has many very ambitious infrastructural investment projects, and it needs to balance its books. Mm-hmm. There is very little that South Africa can do other than to become less dependent on imports of crude oil. And one of the sad stories for in South Africa's economic history recently that hasn't attracted enough attention is the decline in our ability to produce petroleum domestically. We used to provide a significant proportion of our crude oil needs from domestic sources, and that has virtually disappeared.
And then to the other reason that was stated or cited, it's the slate levy, which one would say is a bit of an unfamiliar concept for some. When you cite reasons such as rand-dollar exchange, many fully understand, the curtailing of oil production. But unpack slate levies for us. What exactly are they talking about?
Really, it's a case of, trying to account for the timing of bringing the oil into the country. At times, the price fluctuates on a continuous basis, and you can't be quite sure from one day to the next whether what exactly you are paying to import crude oil. The slate levy essentially tries to compensate for this. In other words, it creates a surplus when there is to be able to fund the oil imports when there is, prices are rising very sharply, and then to diminish that surplus when oil prices are falling quite sharply. And in this regard, everyone is jumping up and down about the fact that the fuel price has risen very sharply, etc., and what can we do about it? The fact is that if you look ahead, as we economists do, there is a potential for the price of petrol to drop by more than 2 rand a litre at the beginning of November, and the price of diesel to drop by more than 1 rand a litre. We'll see whether the same cries foul of the way in which government is handling the fuel crisis will be will be commented upon when fuel prices drop massively next month.
But it will most certainly be a welcome reduction if indeed they do drop. But Doctor, when listening to the conversation throughout this week, be it from organised labour or political parties, all of them are in agreement that this hike will in fact lead to an increase in other goods and services. Now, I saw the proposal by Mmusi Maimane from Busa and it's not necessarily new, but he was of the view that there needs to be a reduction of the general fuel levy and the RAF levy again. But we all remember that reprieve last year, I think it was between April and June. It didn't come easy. A number of your colleagues, economists, were very worried about the impact of doing away with the levies, which contribute 90 billion to our fiscus. Where do you stand on this proposal in 2023 when the consumer is squeezed from every side?
Where I stand is that that in many countries of the world, the fuel levy is seen as an environmentally friendly manner of raising taxes. The fuel levy in many European countries, for example, is very much higher than it is in South Africa. That is why the cost of petrol in several European countries, for example, is much higher than it is in South Africa, because the fuel levy acts not only as a way of raising government revenue, but also dissuading people from using cars, and in so doing burning carbon that is environmentally pollutant to the world. So from that point of view, I think it's there is an argument to say that one needs a fuel levy. The question to ask is, if we do away with the fuel levy, would you like to pay an extra 4-5% VAT, raise it to 20%, then you can, from 15%, then you can do away with the fuel levy quite easily. Or alternatively, would you like to raise the top marginal rate of income tax from 45% to around 55 or 60%? Then that was also a way of doing away with the fuel levy. With the RAF levy, that's a different story. There are a lot of aspersions being cast as to how efficiently that is being run and whether or not it is an efficient way to try and compensate people for the enormous amount of road carnage that is taking place in this country. Rather, one needs to try and find a way of reducing the incidence of road carnage. I've just come back from a trip in Peru where I saw that the way they're dealing with it is to introduce more and more speed humps everywhere you go, so that people are unable to drive at more than 70 or 80 kilometers per hour on any road in the country. And as a consequence, the incidence of road carnage and the cost to the economy is much, much less. If we were to have a situation, that's another way of dealing with the situation.
But it seems that that would be probably a more long-term goal if we are to sort of change the mindset of people on our roads. But if it had to be something that is done now, how do we cushion the consumers at this point? Because just listening to you doesn't seem that you're of the view that the fuel levy would be an option. So how could they be cushioned at this point?
Right now, what I would do, knowing the circumstances at play, is that I would possibly reduce the fuel levy for this current month dramatically and reintroduce it at an even higher level next month, when fuel prices should be coming down very sharply. And in that way, from one month to the next, where we have a lot of information available to know what is happening in terms of the under and over recovery on fuel, we would be able to stabilize the fuel price. But look, that's water under the bridge. We've already increased fuel prices, so it's too late to do that. But next month, we will see a substantial increase in the decrease in the price of fuel, and the situation will be a lot easier for consumers. But we've already taken the decision this month to increase the fuel levy, and because the price of oil has come back down from $95 to $84 a barrel, and that is because people are now scared that the world economy is going to go into a sharp downturn as a result of higher interest rates, and that will see a countervailing decline in demand for crude oil, and prices have fallen as a consequence. So we're going to get that benefit next month, and we'll see what all these cries, where there's a reversal of these cries about higher fuel prices. What people don't realize is that even today, the price of fuel is actually lower than it was a year ago.
Doctor, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That was Dr. Tshwane, who is the chief economist at Econometrics. To this story now, the Russian government is ready to ease the ban on diesel exports in coming days. This is according to the Russian publication, The Daily Commerçant, which cited unidentified sources. The shortage of diesel is one of the contributing factors to recent increases in fuel prices locally.
Diesel is Russia's biggest oil product export at almost 35 million tons last year. South Africa is a net importer of fuel, meaning that over and above what can locally be produced, South Africa needs to import additional finished products to satisfy domestic demand. Since the beginning of the year, diesel prices have increased by almost R3.80 inland and R3.37 at the coast. Economists at FNB warn that farmers face profit margin compression following the latest fuel prices. They point out that these come at the onset of heightened activity and consumption of the fuel in the agriculture calendar. Fuel accounts for about 10% of the annual grain and oilseed variable costs. In the livestock and horticulture subsectors, fuel is critical for the transportation of produce to markets, and recently a huge input in farm operations as well as cold storage facilities due to load shedding in South Africa.
Fresh produce always requires the maintenance of a cold chain, and any breakage of this process can compromise the quality and safety of perishables such as fruit, vegetables, meat and dairy products. With the poultry sector hit by the avian flu and the consequent disruption to operations in this industry, further fuel hikes are additional financial strain to our producers.
The bank says the short-term outlook of fuel prices remains uncertain given the increased volatility of both the international Brent crude oil prices and the Rand-US dollar exchange rate. Although easing lately, it is still above $90 per barrel. It warns that there is a further upside potential given the increased appetite for production cuts by major producers and exporters such as Saudi Arabia and Russia. Diabo Seto, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, data indicates that South African consumers are buckling under pressure of higher interest rates. The total value of new credit granted increased by 0.15% to 141.78 billion in the second quarter of this year. The Consumer Credit Market Report, published by the National Credit Regulator, also showed that outstanding consumer credit balances at the end of June stood at 2.3 trillion rand. This is a 0.74% increase in quarter to quarter and up by 5.8% year on year. Of the 27 million credit active consumers in the market, just over 17 million were classified to be in good standing, down by 215,000 people relative to the previous quarter.
The National Credit Regulator sources its quarterly data reports from registered credit providers and credit bureaus and notes that there were some 15 million applications for credit in the second quarter. But about 70% of those were rejected due to strict lending approval criteria. That translates to about 10 million applicants being rejected.
I think what we're witnessing now, it's a culmination of the repo rate that has been on the increase for some time. It's starting to filter down, and consumers are now feeling the pinch with your credit providers starting to close the taps.
The National Credit Regulator says the relatively high inflation and interest rate situation is placing massive strain on consumers, but urges them to avoid going to underground lenders.
As a regulator, we would really want consumers against going into an unregulated space because there's lots of dangers. They charge rates way beyond what is actually regulated.
The NCR says when consumers are in financial difficulty, going for a debt review process should be the last resort option. And even then, consumers must do their homework to ensure that those who purport to be in the debt counselling business are registered with the NCR, as there are many dodgy players out there. The first option, they say, is to be straight with your credit provider and make a payment arrangement.
Make sure that you are up to date with your payments. And when you are seeing the first signs of trouble, approach them and say, I need to rearrange on this motor vehicle finance or on this mortgage or whatever personal loan you may have. They are very much willing to assist in that regard. Going to your debt counseling should be the last option.
In these trying economic times, consumers are urged to go back to basics and draw a weekly or monthly budget and make shopping lists and stick to them rigidly to better manage expenses. Nompumelelo Siziba, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, let's shift our focus to the city of Tshwane now, which is facing another threat that could plunge it into deeper chaos. Civic organizations are considering campaigns to boycott the payment of municipal bills until quality services are restored. Many communities, especially in townships, are crippled by poor services as the labour dispute between municipal workers and the city continues.
Like most townships, Eersterus east of Pretoria is also not spared from the crippling effects of the municipal workers' dispute. They now want to stop paying for services.
As you can see, the state that our community is in, they feel that why must they pay for services that are not rendered? While the mayor and all the other parties are playing footsie in political games.
You know what, we are feeling very, very bad because of Tshwane, because they don't look after this place, because everybody come and dump everything here.
And some civic organizations say it's time to act. They want to start campaigns to stop the payment of municipal services until the labour impasse is fully resolved and communities are prioritized.
Because the city doesn't want to use its workforce, doesn't want to release money, doesn't want to release tools of trade because they've got interest in business. The city is run by consulting firms, and these officials and the mayor and the DA-led coalition knows exactly what they are doing. I mean, it's a political mind game, and we are not going to allow it. Trust me, we are not going to allow it. First and foremost, we are going to dethrone all these political parties. They must forget about the numbers after 2024. We wouldn't be doing justice to the communities if we leave these issues unattended.
Tshwane city manager says these threats could be catastrophic on the city finances that are already strained.
There is still a city that needs to be run. There's still infrastructure that needs to be maintained. Our landfill sites, for example, cost us a lot of money to maintain and to service them. So if there is a campaign not to pay, it will hurt the city more. It will set us further back, and it certainly will not be to the advantage of the ratepayers. We are confident that the Labour Court would grant us an expedited hearing on the review. When the Labour Court has spoken, that would be the end of the matter as far as I'm concerned.
Residents are also unhappy about politics that have seemingly taken priority over their needs.
Why are we suffering because of political parties that are playing games in the city of Tshwane just to resolve the issues and make sure that our people get the services that they need to get? It's not your job at the end of the day. And what is so frustrating is the fact that you get your bill every month, and you look at your bill. You must pay your full bill, but you don't get services that have been rendered. So the majority of the people feel, why must we pay for services that are not being rendered?
That will not help if we're going to boycott and play that, because why? This Tshwane must prepare this place nicely.
The Tshwane mayor appealed for patience and cooperation, yet refuses to pay the workers who are clearly trying every trick in the book to disrupt services in order to put pressure on the Tshwane mayor until he pays their salary increases.
It will be very dangerous to withhold rates and taxes at this stage, because that will lead to long-term disruption. It will lead to the collapse of service delivery and the capacity of municipalities to affect service delivery. So what we've been saying is that we're doing everything possible to end this unprotected strike, to resume services. Yes, it is difficult. It is very, very difficult, especially with the instances of organized crime that have been happening. But if folks withhold payment for services, that is going to put us on a downward spiral, and there's just no good outcome to that.
It's been almost 3 months since the impasse started, and the city continues to lose millions daily due to the labor dispute that has led to city assets being torched and vandalized. It now remains to be seen whether the threats to boycott payments for services will materialize, or will residents simply stick it out. Patricia Fasage, SABC News in Pretoria.
Now, over 5 million hens producing eggs have been culled due to the avian flu outbreak raging across the country. Eggs are in short supply, with only 2 provinces, that's the Eastern Cape and Northern Cape, not affected. Meanwhile, the Limpopo Agriculture Department says it has enough capacity and the capability to contain the outbreak of the avian flu in that province.
Poultry farming has been hit hard by avian flu. Chicken and eggs often considered affordable forms of protein. However, the current outbreak of avian flu has impeded this form of food supply. With the recent outbreak of avian flu in the country, it's estimated that over 5 million birds have had to be culled. This as the country tries to curb the spread of the flu. However, the latest outbreak has thrown a spanner into the works, with the prices of eggs soaring and shelves being empty in supermarkets. Farmers are also saying they cannot keep up with the demand and supply. While Limpopo has only recorded 4 farms with an avian influenza outbreak, the ripple effects are also felt by those in the sector in the province. Limpopo poultry farmer George Maluleka says business is booming and prices are skyrocketing.
You know, there were people that were not used to order from me. Now they are becoming more, I'm seeing more of the new faces than the old faces. Yes, so the demand is higher in such a way that we cannot supply. So I think this shortage, this situation where chickens are short, it gives us a pressure because everyone wants help. When you woke up early in the morning, everyone say, give me something. You cannot give because you only have what you have.
As farms in the province juggle supply and demand, the agriculture authorities say they have the situation under control and residents in the province should not panic.
What we can confirm is that the Limpopo is affected in the Waterberg region. Only 4 farms which have been identified in Bilabila, Modimolle and Mogalakwena. The rest of our province is still safe now. Skukune, Capricorn, Vembe, and Mopani. Our technicians, as we are speaking, they are attending to the matter.
For now, consumers will have to part with more of their hard-earned money to put chicken products on the table. Mahlako Komane, SABC News, Mokopane in Limpopo.
Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, the National Student Financial Aid Scheme says it expects to receive the report into allegations of tender rigging at the scheme in the next 10 working days. The allegations relate to the awarding of tenders to 4 companies tasked with the direct payment of student allowances into students' bank accounts. The NSFAS board has briefed Parliament's Oversight Committee on the direct payment system, accommodation and the backlog in NSFAS application appeals.
NSFAS is once again on a drive to overhaul its system as it moves towards resolving problems with the direct payments system. NSFAS CEO Andile Nongogo was placed on special leave in August following maladministration allegations from his previous employer, and service providers from his previous employer have allegedly followed him to benefit at NSFAS.
Whether the service providers are registered financial service providers or whether there exists a historical business and tender relationship between the CEO of NSFAS and the director of Convest, and whether all these companies who were awarded these tenders met all the requirements as stated in the bid advertisement, and whether NSFAS also confirm whether the appointed service providers have experience in the financial sector and have the capacity to deliver on the mandate, and whether these companies applied only when the requirements of the tender were lowered, and all 4 did not apply at first when the tender was advertised.
But one of the implicated companies, Coinvest Africa, has denied any wrongdoing.
The contract that we have was as a result of the tender that was put out by NSFAS. And as a business, obviously, that is hunting for business, we submitted our bid, and subsequent to internal processes of NSFAS, we awarded the project. And the contract is for 5 years, renewable.
The scheme is also threatening to lay criminal complaints against fraudsters when investigations are complete. These include the 38 million rand that has been recovered by the Special Investigating Unit in a Free State college.
An implementation of a 24-hour call center and the initiation of criminal and legal action against all students and all other people who have been defrauding the NSFAS system.
NSFAS says it's also trying to deal with the backlog of student accommodation applications. Just over 38% of students who applied for accommodation have received it.
The accreditation of the beds have been slow because initially it was a manual process, a manual system. NSFAS stopped the manual process and had to ingest the accreditation reports that were already done manually into the system whilst developing an accreditation tool on the system. This has been developed. The tool will allow the accreditors to accredit accommodation online and live, and accreditors are being allocated work for them to start with the accreditation from the 9th of October 2023.
The scheme says it wants to eradicate the NSFAS tuition application appeals backlog by the end of October. Ulelani Philip, SABC News, Parliament.
President Cyril Ramaphosa says the Border Management Authority is a vital link in South Africa's efforts to benefit from the African Continental Free Trade Area. Ramaphosa has launched the single authority of the country's ports of entry in Musina and Limpopo. Now we apologize for the poor sound quality.
The ground lays fertile for the ambitious trade pact to create a single market for goods in Africa through the legal establishment of the Border Management Authority, which will secure safe borders in the country.
When our country's ports of entry and borders are well protected and well managed, we are able to prevent the illegal importation and exit of goods into and from our country. We are able to facilitate lawful trade at a greater scale and, much more importantly, in an efficient manner. This is becoming increasingly important as we work with other countries in our region and elsewhere on the continent to increase intra-African trade.
The launch was a stone throw away from the Beit Bridge border, one of the busiest ports of entry, which sees a large influx of undocumented migrants. A challenge which is expected to be one of the major talking points for the 2024 elections, with the rise of anti-migrant groups calling for immigration laws to be upheld.
The BMA was established in response to a number of serious challenges. One of these challenges is the increase in the number of undocumented foreign nationals entering our country. This has exacerbated many of our country's social and economic problems.
Ramaphosa visited the border with his Zimbabwean counterpart, President Emmerson Mnangagwa, where they agree that the BMA will be an important tool for the development of the region.
This border management agency will form part of integrating border management activities in the SADC region as well, as we implement the African Continental Free Trade Area. We will be able to work towards eradicating various forms of red tape that are hindering free trade as well as investment and the movement of people.
July saw the deployment of the first officers of the Border Guard of the BMA border law enforcement functions. The South African National Defence Force, however, remains responsible for border protection and safeguarding. Kani Mapanga, SABC News, Musina.
To this story now, the advocacy group Freedom Under Law says it's deeply troubled by the Judicial Service Commission's decision to only fill 2 vacancies at the Supreme Court of Appeal, as well as its rejection of the candidature of Justice David Unterhalter. After 2 days of interviewing 10 candidates, the body recommended Justice Faiz Kathri Tshwane and Justice Ena Huela for the appointment to the Appellate Court, which had 4 vacancies. Freedom Under Law is upset with what it describes as the JSC's failure to recommend the appointment of Judge Unterhalter. The organization notes that Justice Unterhalter commands great respect among local and international colleagues and legal practitioners, adding that in a review of candidates for the sitting of the JSC, the General Counsel of the Bar lauded him as a gifted jurist and constitutional lawyer. To international news, France has announced that it will start withdrawing its troops from Niger this week. Relations between Niger and its former colonial ruler have broken down since the military coup in July. The decision to withdraw 1,500 troops by the end of the year leaves a massive gap in the battle against a decade-long insurgency in the Sahel region.
The move comes after weeks of pressure from Niger's junta and anti-French demonstrations. This will likely worsen Western concern over Russia's expanding influence in Africa. The mercenary force Wagner is already present in neighboring Mali following coups there. It should be pointed out to national and international public opinion that since the announcement of this withdrawal plan, France has continued to deploy its forces in several ECOWAS countries as part of the preparations for an aggression against Niger that it's planning in collaboration with this community organization. Some analysts say France's exit from Niger was a matter of time, and the West needs to rethink its relationship to Africa to remain relevant.
France has already left Mali and Burkina Faso, so when the CNSP, the junta in Niger, had requested that France also leave Niger, I think there was a little bit of a ticking time bomb there in terms of when that was actually going to happen. It wasn't really a question of if, but rather when. The problem is that these three countries have come to terms with the fact that they are not okay with the way that France went about. It's almost 10 years at least of a counterterrorism mission there. Whether their reason for this notwithstanding, it's clear that they're all kind of in lockstep in terms of their approach towards France. So it's not exactly surprising.
Meanwhile, the business community says these coups don't bode well for the continent.
It's absolutely concerning, and the international perspective of coups anywhere in the world is not good. It creates uncertainty, it increases risk premiums. However, I think it's really important to try and unpack and understand the causes of those coups. And for me, the causes of those coups is driven by a rapidly increasing population and very little additional real balance sheet growth in the countries concerned. So you look at Niger, the most recent, for example, you have a population which has gone from 2.5 million people at independence to 30 million people to this now, to 70 plus million people by 2050, and you see very little real enterprise which provides opportunities to people for a future.
Niger's also accepted Algeria's offer of mediation to help resolve its political crisis. Kylie Kumalo, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, former U.S. President Donald Trump's family business hangs in the balance as his New York civil fraud trial continues. The political theater outside the courtroom is what has gripped the public's attention. The Republican frontrunner for the president in 2024, who has attended the first 3 days of proceedings, has leveraged the opportunity to create a media spectacle by complaining outside the courtroom that he's a victim of an overzealous state attorney general intent on hurting his chances of re-election. But after days of attacks from the former president, the AG, Letitia James, accused Trump of a political stunt and said she won't be bullied.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, why did you decide to come?
Trump is not required to be in court for the civil trial, but has chosen to make an appearance each of the first 3 days of the hearing, leveraging the opportunity as a campaign stop, arguing, as he's done before, that this was all part of a broad political conspiracy against him and a witch hunt.
This is a continuation of the single greatest witch hunt of all time. We have a rogue judge who rules that properties are worth a tiny fraction, 1/100th, a tiny fraction of what they actually are. The crime is against me because we have a corrupt district attorney, but we have a corrupt attorney general. And it all comes down from the DOJ. They're totally coordinated this in Washington because I'm the leading candidate. I'm leading Biden by 10 points.
The presiding judge has already ruled that Trump and his businesses committed fraud, finding conclusive evidence that he inflated his fortune to secure favorable bank loans and insurance, a ruling that Trump is now appealing, as he kept up attacks on those he believes are persecuting him.
Judge Engoron has been given false and extremely misleading information about my net worth. Private company, nobody's supposed to know my net worth, but now everybody is and will, and I hope you're impressed. We built a great company. But he's been given false information, misleading information, and corrupt information by a very corrupt and incompetent Attorney General, Letitia James. This woman is grossly incompetent. She ran on the basis I will get Trump without knowing anything about me.
But the state attorney general, who's seeking at least $250 million in fines and a permanent ban on Trump running businesses in New York, has accused him, his adult sons, the Trump Organization and others of inflating his net worth by up to $2.2 billion as she directly addressed the litany of attacks against her.
They were void of any facts and or any evidence. What they were comments that unfortunately fomented violence, and comments that I would describe as race baiting, and comments unfortunately that appeals to the bottom of our humanity. This case was brought simply because it was a case where individuals have engaged in a pattern and practice of fraud. And I will not sit idly by and allow anyone to subvert the law. And lastly, I will not be bullied. And so Mr. Trump is no longer here. The Donald Trump show is over. This was nothing more than a political stunt, a fundraising stop. And now we can continue to go forward with our trial, and we are confident that justice will be served.
Judge Arthur Ngoron earlier issued a gag order against Trump after he posted a social media attack on the judge's law clerk. The judge warned Trump during the second day of trial that personal attacks against members of the court staff were unacceptable and inappropriate and ordered him not to do so again. The judge himself and the Attorney General are excluded from that order. But the last 3 days do give us some insight into the colourful political theatre that will continue to play out around Trump's multiple court cases as he runs for the Republican nomination to be president next year. He continues to hold a commanding lead in the polls, and his mountain of legal troubles appears to have only boosted his prospects. Chauvin Briceby's SABC News, New York.
And that's where we leave it for today. I'm back tomorrow. Have a great day further.